Hold up. I'm hearing some crime sound going down bigger analysis. You know what? We screwcast you gotta see what's going down in LA right now.
In the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay sits a small rocky island that once held some of the most dangerous criminals in America. That island was home to the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, a prison so secure, so isolated, and so heavily guarded that authorities believed escape was impossible. The icy waters surrounding the island were not just cold, they were deadly. Powerful currents swept through the bay. Temperatures in the water could quickly drain the strength from even the strongest swimmer, and patrol boats constantly circled the island. For decades, criminals across the United States feared one thing more than anything else: being sent to Alcatraz, because everyone believed the same thing. Once you went in, you were never coming out. But in 1962, 3 prisoners decided to challenge that belief, and what happened next would become one of the greatest prison mysteries in American history. Life inside Alcatraz was brutal. The prison was designed to do one thing: break the spirit of inmates. Cells were tiny, just a narrow steel box with barely enough space for a bed, a toilet, and a small sink. Prisoners had almost no privacy. Guards watched their every move. Every day followed the exact same routine. Wake up, morning count, breakfast, work duty, lunch, more work, evening lockdown, dinner, lights out. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Many prisoners said Alcatraz didn't just imprison your body, it slowly imprisoned your mind. Some of America's most famous criminals were held there, men like Al Capone and George Kelly. But among the hundreds of inmates who passed through those steel gates, 3 men were quietly planning something the prison had never seen before. The man behind the plan was Frank Morris. Frank Morris was not an ordinary prisoner. He was known as one of the most intelligent inmates in the entire prison system. Authorities estimated his IQ to be around 133. But intelligence alone wasn't what made Morris dangerous. It was his obsession with escape. Before arriving at Alcatraz, Morris had already escaped from multiple prisons. Each time, authorities captured him again. And each time, he tried something even more daring.
I'm saying like more just a person out of prison in the United States, kind of like microscopic in prison break.
Eventually, officials decided enough was enough. They sent him to the one place they believed no prisoner could escape from: Alcatraz. But the moment Morris arrived, he began studying the prison. The walls, the guards, the schedules, the routines, every tiny detail. Because Morris believed something the prison authorities did not. No prison is perfect, and if he looked closely enough, he might just find the weakness. Not long after arriving at Alcatraz, Frank Morris met 2 men who would become crucial to his plan: brothers John Anglin and Clearance Anglin. The Anglin brothers grew up poor in Florida. Their childhood was spent working farms and fishing boats, but growing up near water gave them an important skill. They became excellent swimmers. Eventually, the brothers turned to crime. They were arrested for bank robbery and sentenced to prison. And like Morris, their repeated escape attempts eventually landed them in Alcatraz. When the 3 men met, they quickly realized something. They all had the same dream: freedom. And together, they began planning the impossible inside their prison cells. The men noticed something unusual. At the back of each cell, there was a small ventilation opening. Behind that opening was a narrow utility corridor used by prison workers. At first glance, the vents looked far too small for anyone to pass through. But there was a problem the prison had overlooked. Years of salty ocean air had slowly weakened the concrete around the vents. The material had become soft and brittle, and that meant one thing: With enough time, it could be broken. The problem was, they had no tools, but prisoners are experts at improvisation, and soon, they began collecting materials, metal spoons, scrap metal, broken parts from an old vacuum cleaner. Slowly, secretly, they built their own homemade drill. Every night, the men began digging, but they had to be careful. One wrong sound could alert the guards. Fortunately, the prison had a band that played music during evening recreation time. The sound echoed through the building, and that music became the perfect cover. While guitars played, while drums echoed, the prisoners quietly chipped away at the concrete walls, a little at a time, every night, month after month. Slowly, the holes grew larger, until eventually, they were big enough for a man to crawl through. But digging the tunnel was only part of the plan. The guards performed regular nighttime bed checks. If they discovered the cells were empty, the entire prison would go into lockdown. So the prisoners created one of the most clever tricks in prison escape history. They built fake heads, using soap, toilet paper, cement dust, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop. They crafted incredibly realistic dummy heads. At night, they placed the fake heads on their pillows. From the doorway, in the dim prison lighting, the heads looked real, and the guards never noticed the difference. Behind the prison walls, the men created a secret workshop. It was hidden in the unused space above the cell block. Here they built the most important part of their plan. A raft, using over 50 stolen raincoats. They stitched and sealed the raincoats together using heat from steam pipes. The result was an inflatable raft strong enough to float across the bay. They also made life jackets, wooden paddles, and a hand pump to inflate the raft. Everything was built in secret, piece by piece, for months, all for one night. June 11th, 1962. To the prison guards at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, it was just another night. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious, the same routine that had repeated itself thousands of times before. The final bell rang through the cell block. Guards walked the corridors one last time. Metal doors slammed shut, one by one. The lights inside the prison slowly went dark. Inside their tiny steel cells, hundreds of prisoners settled into bed. The prison grew quiet, cold, still. But inside 3 cells, 3 men were wide awake. For months they had been preparing for this moment. Every spoon scraped into the concrete wall, every stolen raincoat, every second spent building their raft in secret. It had all led to this night. In the dim glow of the prison lights, Frank Morris carefully placed the fake head onto his pillow. From the doorway, it looked exactly like a sleeping prisoner. Beside him, the Anglin brothers did the same. John Anglin and Clarence Anglin positioned their dummy heads perfectly beneath the blankets. 3 sleeping prisoners. Or at least, that's what the guards believed. Then slowly, quietly, they climbed out of their beds. One by one, they slipped into the holes they had spent months carving into the concrete walls. Behind the cells was a narrow utility corridor hidden from the guards. Dust filled the air as the men crawled through the darkness. The prison walls that once trapped them were now the path to freedom. They moved carefully. Every step could mean discovery. Every sound could alert the guards. Above them, footsteps echoed through the prison corridors, but the guards never noticed. The 3 men climbed higher through the building. Pipes, ladders, maintenance tunnels. Cold metal surfaces scraped against their hands as they slowly made their way upward. Finally, they reached the roof of the prison. The wind outside was brutal. It howled across the island like a warning. Below them, the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay smashed violently against the rocks. The currents in this bay were known to drag even experienced swimmers far out into the ocean. Many believed no one could survive these waters, but the 3 men had come too far to turn back now. Carefully, they climbed down a pipe along the outside wall of the prison. Every movement had to be silent. Below them was the dark prison yard. Searchlights slowly swept across the ground, timing their movements carefully. They ran, across the yard, across the island, toward the shoreline, hidden behind rocks near the water's edge. They pulled out the raft they had secretly built from stolen raincoats. Their hands worked quickly in the darkness. They inflated the raft, tied their makeshift life jackets, and looked out at the black water in front of them. No lights, no rescue, just darkness and freezing ocean currents. Then, without hesitation, they pushed the raft into the water, climbed inside, and began paddling away from the island. The prison slowly faded behind them. The lights of Alcatraz grew smaller. The cold wind roared across the bay, and somewhere in the darkness, 3 prisoners disappeared into the night. The next morning began like every other morning at Alcatraz. Guards walked the cell blocks preparing for the daily prisoner count. The sun slowly rose over the island. Everything appeared normal, quiet, routine, predictable, but something was wrong. In one cell, a prisoner hadn't moved. A guard stopped and looked closer. Still no movement. He stepped inside the cell and reached down to shake the prisoner awake. The moment his hand touched the head on the pillow, something strange happened. The head rolled sideways. Then, it fell off the bed and hit the floor. It wasn't a prisoner. It was a fake head made from soap, paper, and hair. For a moment, the guard just stared in disbelief. Then he realized what had happened. The prisoner was gone. Within seconds, alarms exploded across the prison. Sirens screamed through the halls. Guards ran through the corridors shouting orders. Every cell was searched, every hallway inspected. But it was already too late. 3 prisoners were missing. For the first time in the prison's history, someone had escaped Alcatraz. The news spread quickly. Authorities launched one of the largest prison searches in American history. The entire San Francisco Bay became a massive search zone. Helicopters lifted into the air. Searchlights swept across the cold ocean waters. Boats from the United States Coast Guard raced across the bay. Divers scanned the water near the island, and investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation began searching for clues. For days, the search continued, hour after hour, wave after wave. Then finally, something appeared in the water, a paddle, then pieces of the homemade raft. Later, a small waterproof wallet. Inside was identification belonging to Clearance Anglin. But that was all they found. No bodies, no raft, no prisoners. It was as if the 3 men had vanished into the ocean. Authorities believed the men probably drowned. The water in the bay is brutally cold. Temperatures can drop below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Strong currents move unpredictably through the water. Many swimmers lose strength within minutes. But something about the case didn't add up. No bodies were ever recovered, not a single one. And over the years, strange reports began to surface. Family members claimed they received mysterious letters that appeared to come from the Anglin brothers. Some even claimed the brothers secretly visited their mother years later. Then, decades after the escape, another rumor surfaced. 2 American men living quietly in Brazil, living under different names. Some believed they were the Anglin brothers, but no proof was ever confirmed, and the mystery only grew deeper. Just 1 year after the escape, in 1963, the United States government made a shocking decision. They shut down Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary forever. The prison was too expensive to maintain. Salt water had slowly damaged the buildings, and after the escape, the prison's reputation for being inescapable had been shattered. Today, the island looks very different. Tourists arrive every day by ferry. They walk through the empty prison halls, past the rusted bars, past the silent corridors, and they stop in front of the very cells where the escape began. The ventilation holes are still there, a reminder of the night 3 prisoners challenged the impossible. More than 60 years later, the mystery still remains. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John Anglin and Clarence Anglin, die in the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay? Or did they pull off the most daring prison escape in American history? Did they reach the mainland, disappear into new identities, and live the rest of their lives as free men? No one knows. And maybe that mystery is what makes the Alcatraz escape one of the greatest crime stories ever told.
It's a real story from way back in America. Them 2 prisoners disappear and ABC and all way all over the planet. Your real talks, people think they change names to steer the rudder.